Welcome to
It's not a microphone.
All right, let's start now with Germany.
Germany since reunification.
Yes,
Such an exciting topic in German history.
I think it is.
Possibly more exciting than Hitler. But I guess I'll let you guys decide. So
Wow.
here is a fun picture of the night that Germany became united. As you see, there's a lot of German flags. Happy.
That is the Brandenburg Gate.
Yep. Well, that's not what the Germans think. So there's a fun video about it, but I didn't put it on here because it was like 10 minutes. I mean, I can always pull it up.
That's all right.
Okay. So, reunified Germany. It was a pretty big deal because it was the first time in world history that like two such different systems of government merged into one system of government. Communism and I guess democracy. And so it created.
What do you mean you guess? Of course it's democracy.
Yes, it's democracy for sure. Final answer. There were 5 new states of which I cannot pronounce besides Saxony.
Oh, Brandenburg.
Well, yeah, I guess I could say that. I'm just choosing not to. I don't want to insult my people.
Okay.
So.
Saxony certainly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they had to have all new elections for people because they couldn't just like pick a few communists to come in with the rest of the Democrats.
Democratic state.
Yeah. So on October 14th they held state parliament elections for the first time in Eastern German history. And then a new chancellor was picked on December 2nd, 1990, and they ended up picking Kohl, who united the country, both the countries together. He was the president of not the president, the chancellor of West Germany already. So despite the two being unified, there are still some differences in the two areas of town now. So the economics in East Germany, people were making 2/3 less than in West Germany. Real estate, like property, was only worth half as much in East Germany, and they had to merge the currencies of East Germany and West Germany, so it was 2 Eastern marks for 1 Western mark, which took a big hit on the Western economy. It cost them a lot of money to reunite the countries. So yeah.
Well, East Germany had been, after the war, World War II, the Western countries had pumped a lot of money into West Germany, like the United States, Great Britain, and so forth, trying to rebuild the country, rebuild the factories. In Germany, West Germany had really boomed with all kinds of, factories and so forth. But in East Germany, when the Soviets came in, they actually dismantled almost every factory.
Yeah.
Put it on train and hauled it to the Soviet Union and rebuilt it there. And would actually bring in the people, like the people who had worked there to train Soviets to do it, and then ship the other people back. And so their economy that was one reason it was terrible, because this is the way the Soviets got their reparations, I guess, so they did not rebuild East Germany. And so East Germany was way behind. And then when this thing merges, that was the problem. And it's still a problem today, I think.
It said I think it was in the book or online, I don't remember which one I read it in, but it said that they've been trying to build tourist attractions in East Germany and it's not working because no one wants a communist amusement park, I guess. I don't know.
I get it.
I said I would
communist amusement park?
Yeah.
We have like a Lenin roller coaster.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, okay, so where is the gulag?
Yeah. I kind of thought about it way too in depth. I thought about like hotel rooms and everything. I was like, wow, why did this not work? This sounds pretty fun.
Hotel rooms with what? A communist amusement park?
Yeah, because if they have an amusement park, they have to have a hotel.
Sure, of course, you got to.
So.
And you gotta have, like hot dogs and stuff. They love
Yeah.
sausages.
True.
Bratwurst, knockwurst.
But you can't give them the fancy things, so.
Well, knockwurst isn't that fancy. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, true. It just kind of sounds. So yeah. In West Germany, they were making a lot more money, as you see there. They got to keep their currency, which was good, even though they had to give a bunch of money to East Germany. And yeah, there was a random statistic in the book that West Germans were twice as likely to drive a BMW. It's like, that's
Kind of
pretty
like SEU students.
true.
As compared to faculty.
That's true actually. In foreign policy, well, part of it was domestic policy too. There was a bunch of boundary, like property disputes, because people, when the communists came into East Germany, they kind of got rid of everybody's property, and now that they were free, those people like wanted it back. So it was hard to figure out who actually owned this property. I think they said in like 1 year they settled like 2 million or something property disputes. I was like, wow, that's actually pretty impressive.
Well, when a lot of people fled East Germany, East Berlin, East Germany, when it happened, they were in the West, and then their property was confiscated by the government and then reassigned to other people, and then you imagine you come back and you say, okay, this was our family home, but we haven't lived there now for 30 years, roughly.
Yeah.
And so the government assigned it to somebody else, and now they're living there, but that's really my property. So then you have to work all that out.
Yeah.
People living there say, no, it's mine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the rest of them. Let's see. The rest of, well, there were 4 major powers that had to give Germany permission to unify. England, well, Great Britain, the United States, Soviets, and I just forgot the fourth. France. Yeah, and so they kind of had to work things out with them because they did not really, nobody was really for that besides the Germans, especially Margaret Thatcher.
Margaret Thatcher wasn't for it?
Oh no. It said that she kept a map of Germany in her purse just to like illustrate the problems that could happen.
In her purse?
Yeah.
Carried it with her?
Yeah, she did. She wasn't really a fan of German reunification.
Well, did a World War I and II thing.
Yeah, she just didn't really want to put up with
Still
that.
on her mind.
Well, it's okay,
Yeah.
because Germany went from being the nightmare hellspawn of Europe to the absolute basket case pushover of Europe.
Yeah. Well, and she also lived during World War II.
Yes.
So that's, yeah, she remembered it.
Just having bombs dropped on the city.
Yeah. Kind of puts a damper on your opinion of
I think it would.
the German people.
I think it would. Yeah, there were a lot of people that were nervous about it.
Yeah.
And the reunification of it, what was going to happen, what would happen with a unified Germany. And now we see that they run all of Europe.
Yeah.
But they haven't taken it over. They just run it economically.
Yeah. So it said the book said they're too small to be a world power, but too big to be a European power. So.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. Dietrich has a good way of putting things.
Dietrich guy. See, that's why I picked his book. He's got a way of words.
He uses a few too many, but I guess that's okay. Yeah, other people were worried that Germany would destabilize Europe with probably the whole communist thing.
Oh, I see. Kept the map with 1937 borders. You know,
Yeah. She's a little nervous. But I see why.
you have to remember this is only, what, 54 years after 1937,
Yeah.
and 45 years or something since the end of the war. So
Yeah.
it's still pretty fresh on everybody's mind.
Yeah, it said like the people living in East Germany only had one generation or two generations to live in East Germany. So it didn't really last that long.
There was talk of having it become a separate country. I
Mhm.
think that was the alternative. Have East Germany just remain East Germany and be free of Soviet control.
Yeah.
Sort of like Czech Republic or something.
But that did not happen. So, 2 decades after reunification, Germany is a pretty cool place. Pretty rich. Make a lot of cars and stuff. People move throughout the whole country, but West Germany is still a lot more popular than East Germany. Mostly women live in Eastern Germany.
Mostly women live in Eastern Germany?
Yeah, men just kind of want to get out.
There
So
might be other factors.
they could be. That's a good one, Dr. Wineland. That's a good
Thanks.
one.
Well, maybe they leave because there's more industry, so maybe they.
Yeah, there's
maybe
more
they go,
opportunity
they
in
go
the
for other
West.
jobs.
Yeah, I think your idea is what it really is, though.
Well,
So.
I didn't actually say it. I just said there might be other factors. I didn't actually voice
Open to interpretation.
Well, yeah, you can interpret that in different ways. Which is what I'm counting on when the lawsuit comes.
Lawsuit. I don't know who in here would want to sue you, Dr. Wineland.
I don't know. It wouldn't get too much, really. People just like it. People are litigious. It's a litigious world we live in.
Yeah.
Like,
Sounds very doctoral and stuff. Smart sounding word.
I mean, lawyers wouldn't have any jobs if we were litigious people. Exactly.
That's what I'm counting.
So you're all for it.
You and Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah too.
So
She zoned you out.
yeah, I know. She's busy doing things, which I'm totally okay with. No, it's okay. You can stop. I would appreciate it if you did.
You see, when you're trying to win a crowd over, you don't want to say that kind of stuff. I sometimes say that kind of stuff, but we should say that what we're saying is very important and you should really listen.
I did this with her all weekend, so she knows what I have to say.
She already knows the thought.
Yeah.
She's already heard it.
Yeah, she's been hearing it Saturday, Sunday.
Okay. All right, now I understand.
Yeah. Yeah. So
9.2% are permanently
that's
poor.
what the book said. I was like, permanently poor? What does that even mean?
I understand that.
I was hoping you could expound on.
Well, I was born permanently poor, so I
poor.
really understand that. It just means you have no hope of changing your economic status. Permanently.
That's what I thought. I was like,
Now here's the thing, though. However, it may not be all the same people.
this is
So,
true. It might
somebody
switch.
gets out of the permanently poor category, but then somebody else has to enter it. You gotta have 9.2%.
Always has to be permanently.
We got a 9.2% of the people.
Yep.
And then as the population grows, you know what that means. You got more permanently poor.
This is true. That's the goal. As many
That's the
permanently
goal.
poor.
As many people permanently poor as possible. I don't think that's really the goal, yes.
I mean, they're not getting rid of the 9.2 permanently poor people because they gave them the title permanently. So that kind of tells us they're not really looking to get the permanently poor people.
He's just trying to make his point. Dietrich. He's a wordsmith.
Oh, Dietrich.
He's a wordsmith.
But yeah, reunification did widen the gap between the upper and the middle class. 10% of the population owned 77% of Germany's assets. So, yeah.
Well, you know,
Makes
all the
for a lot
wealth
of
was in the West,
permanently.
and even in the
people.
West, it was concentrated in certain people. Now when you add this whole new population that's very poor, and they're also not very skilled.
Yeah.
I mean, because they haven't, you know, as far as technology and all these other things, they were way behind. Most of their factories were gone. They didn't have much technology. They don't have any capital. So what are they going to do? So some of those people start to move to the West. Well, what kind of jobs are they going to get? They're going to get jobs that don't pay that well. Yes.
Is this comparable to what, what's going on in Korea?
Well, you mean North and South Korea?
Yeah, like before.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we, you know, it's not going to happen, but if, let's say, you united North and South Korea, they became one country again, just imagine the problems that there would be. There's so much poverty in the North, I would say probably even more than what East Germany had. Just imagine those people have been oppressed. They don't really know what's going on because everything's filtered to them. They don't have the training. And if they're suddenly merged, South Korea is very prosperous, then it would be difficult for South Korea to absorb all of those people and to try to bring them up to a different standard of living and just have enough food and have jobs. So it's a similar kind. So maybe in our minds, we can, we kind of know what North Korea is like. Maybe we know what South Korea is like. It's a similar kind of thing, although in this case, unfortunately, I don't foresee that happening anytime in the near future where those two countries would merge. And there would be the debate. I'm sure there would still be a debate. Do you want to merge North and South Korea together? Why? Because North Korea is a dangerous place. North Korea has communism, has weapons. Are those people really going to integrate into South Korea? Or is it just going to create more problems?
There's in her story that North Korean guy who was in South Korea had a Subway sandwich and liked it so much he just wanted to stay in South Korea.
Well, I like the Subway sandwich. Depends on what kind of it is.
That happens to me every time I go to Subway. Like, wow, this sandwich is good. I think I'll stay in America.
Who grew up with stories about how Americans are such monsters who will kill you and had nightmares about us. Then when he's in South Korea and he meets actual Americans, he's like blown away how we are totally not like them.
Then he knew how terrible.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have to pivot now from the Koreas to the Germanys.
Yes.
Back once again.
I mean, that's...
What? Oh, that was your last one.
Yeah. I didn't want to do all 50 pages of the book.
Yeah, we're done. Okay. Do we have any questions, comments, observations, snide remarks? All right, let's do the applause. Very good. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about the Cold War now. Vietnam, yeah, it's kind of a wacky thing. Berlin, the Cold War, Korea. It's all related, sort of. So let's talk about the Cold War since we're up to this period. At the end of World War II, we're going to take a look at the situation and take it up at least until, about 1990. We've actually gone beyond that with the unification with our earlier talk today. So we see then that we have the Cold War. The Cold War will spread around the world, but it begins in Europe, and it begins in the aftermath of World War II. As you know, I hope you know, towards the end of the war with Germany, there had agreements were made that the Soviets would advance from their position, which is in the east, while the rest of the Allied forces, United States and Great Britain primarily, would advance from the other direction. That means that the Soviets were going to have to march through lots of territory that was occupied by the Germans, much of which they had given away about, a few years earlier, right, to the Germans. So the Soviets then were going to come in and occupy all of Eastern Europe and the Balkans as a part of this process, as well as eastern part of Germany and the eastern part of Berlin. While the U.S. and the other allies in the West, the western part of the allies, are going to come in the other way. Now, the Cold War then gets started because there is a dispute over how are we going to arrange this new configuration. In other words, Germany's defeated. Germany had taken over a lot of territory. What's going to happen to that territory? Not going to want Germany to keep it, right? Because they had taken it in conflict, which is normally the case. But who are you going to give it back to? Part of the problem is, you had fledgling nations, and it had been economically very depressed there. So the idea was we're going to set up new countries, we're going to restore countries, and we're going to have free elections. Now there are 3 conferences that take place during World War II that set up the conditions that we'll see for the Cold War, and that's what I'm going to try to talk about in the next few minutes that we're here. Those conferences are called Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam. These 3 conferences, which take place, mostly during the war, one at the end of the European conflict of the war, but of course the Asian part, which we're not even talking about in here, fighting Japan, is still going on. There are 3 big leaders, as they're called. So they call them the Big 3. That's what I call them, the Big 3, right? You like the 3 big 3? Okay. Well, it's figurative, right? And of course, you know who they are probably. Here's their picture, right? You've got Stalin, FDR, and of course, Winston Churchill. I will admit, he's one of my favorites. I like Winston Churchill quite a bit. I've been to his grave a couple of times. He's buried in a rather modest grave near a church in a small town. I've been to the house where he was born. Blenheim Palace is where he was born. Not his family wasn't living; they were related to people there. His mother gave birth there while they were there on a holiday. So, what's that? If we had Winston Churchill today,
Yeah.
I kind of like he was a very direct kind of guy, wasn't he? And so some people did not like him, as a matter of fact. Even the British, they probably would not like him as much today because he's too outspoken.
Politically incorrect, like, no, you guys speak out against Nazis.
Well, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin.
How dare you insinuate all kinds of
They meet in Tehran in 1943. November 1943. Tehran, yes, this is in Iran. And here they are pictured at this meeting. Here they're making plans for the end of the war. The American and British, this is where the plans are drawn up, that they would invade France and push to Germany. Of course, they also come from the south, but that was really more a diversion, right? They came from North Africa across Sicily and up to Italy.
No, that wasn't intended to take out Italy.
Pardon?
That actually was intended to take out Italy.
Well, yes, but that's certainly yeah.
Churchill particularly wanted to attack Italy because he called it the soft underbelly.
Soft underbelly, sure, but that was not the main. That was not the main. Going to be the main invasion. It was meant to push German forces into Italy, which would make it easier for the main event to take place, which was going to come through France. And they had decided that years before. At any rate, the Soviets then would push westward, while the American and British forces would come through France into Germany. They would meet in Germany. This was the plan. And then, you see, this would necessitate that you would now have
the Allied forces in Germany, and they were going to have to partition Germany. Partition it. We don't use the word partition too much, except, I guess, if we put up a little wall inside of this room, we call it a partition. Just kind of subdivide the room. But that's, that's what it means. Partitioning means just dividing. So partitioning of Germany until, and this is one of my favorite words, denazification was complete. Because the idea, the fear was, of course, is if Germany was not controlled, if Germany was not supervised, that the Nazis were so strong and so ingrained, and really they were at all different levels of the government. Not just the top, but all the way down to local politics and all the way down into regional politics. What's that?
So it's like what the Nazis and Jews removed from all levels. No, they don't put it not.
Well, they aren't going to take all the Nazis out and exterminate them, but what they wanted to do is to try to remove Nazi influence from the politics, all the way up through the levels. Anyway, that's what the meeting was about. Now, since you have that plan, you already set up the problems, or the divisions at least, we're going to see in Germany later on, because these allies had one thing in common. They wanted to defeat Nazi Germany. But they didn't have much else in common. I mean, certainly England and the United States did. But they didn't trust each other. They didn't trust the leaders. They didn't trust each other. And so that sort of sets it up. Now, take a look at, focus on FDR there. Remember, this is in November of 1943. Now take a look at FDR in the center, here. So this is about 14 months later, okay? It's pretty obvious that FDR is very sick. He's in fact dying. He's not going to live much longer. He's going to live about another month or so, 6 weeks, something like that. This is the Yalta Conference. Yalta, of course, is on the Crimean Peninsula. So this is in Soviet territory near the Black Sea. Today, well, disputed. The Russians have taken it back from the Ukraine. So here, by this time, of course, we've already had the invasion that took place, you remember, in June of 1944, D-Day. They had pushed through and pushed into Germany. Of course, it's not done yet. They still have fighting to do, but pretty confident that they're winning. This is going to win, and it's going to be soon. It's going to be within weeks or months, certainly. So the West was assured of victory, and so they come together. The same three come together to talk things over. Now, Churchill and Roosevelt did not trust Stalin. Stalin did not trust them. I think the assumption that was made is that the Soviets were weaker than they were, because remember, the Soviets have been fighting in the East by themselves. They've had to invade all of this territory pretty much by themselves. And so the idea here is that their economy, their military, everything is weak, and that the West will be able to control them or get things their way. Of course, it turns out that's not the case. Pardon? I believe they did. I believe they underestimated them. You know, part of it was... Well, yes. I mean, you know, I don't think people in the beginning certainly underestimated Hitler. And certainly people here, I think, are underestimating Stalin. Stalin wanted, control. The thing was, of course, he had to move through miles and miles of territory. The estimates were it was going to take 11 million Soviets to occupy Eastern Europe, all that territory. And the West thought they can't sustain that. They can't keep 11, they can't keep occupying all those territories. They're going to have to pull back. This was the assumption, that they wouldn't be able, but they were. Now, they were suspicious of each other, and what Stalin really wanted was what he called a buffer. he wanted buffer states between him and the West. And those buffer states were going to be Eastern Europe, places like Poland and Lithuania and so forth, Estonia. All those were going to be buffers that he didn't trust them. He figured they were going to invade, or there'd be a war between the Soviets and the West, and therefore now the West would have to come all the way through Eastern Europe to get into the main part of the Soviet Union. So that's what he called for, and he also called for spheres of influence. Spheres of influence. He wanted sphere of influence beyond the Soviets, these Eastern countries, later be called the Eastern Bloc countries, which is going to include East Germany. So let me see if I can do one more screen and then we'll call it quits for now. We'll pick this up on Friday when we have time. Roosevelt at Yalta, main thing he wanted to gain, remember, he's in a weakened condition health-wise, but he wanted self-determination for Europe. And of course, he was concerned because while the war in Europe was about over, the United States had been fighting Japan pretty much by themselves throughout the war. Well, yeah, Australia.
The Japanese should have said the Australians were the strongest soldiers ever fought.
You like to argue, don't you? Well, why don't you raise your hand next time, and I'll call on you. Thanks. So we'll see then that we have about 1 million people, he believed, to end the war in Japan. About 1 million people it was going to take to invade Japan. This was the estimate anyway. Because the Japanese were not giving up anything. Every island they were fighting like to the last man. Even suicidal sort of tactics, right? And so the idea was, as you get closer and closer to Japan, they're going to be more, they're not going to get less determined, they're going to get more determined. And so if you're going to actually invade Japan and take it over, then you're going to have an amphibious assault because it's a group of islands, and it's going to cost millions of lives on our side, and of course millions of lives on their side. It's going to be heavy loss. And the United States would have to do that all alone, but they wanted the Soviets to come and help them because the Soviets have territory on that side. They're going to need help on that. So he is going to be more willing to agree to the Soviets' demands. One, because he thinks that they're weakened, and he won't have to deal with them. Two, I think he's in a weakened condition physically. Three, he knows that Japan is going to be very difficult to take, and they do not have the atomic bomb developed at this point. And so an amphibious assault, he wants help with that from the Soviets. The Soviets would agree to do that, which they do. Then he is willing to agree to what they want. I think we're out of time. So we'll leave it there. I know, they're angry.